All right. Hello, everyone. We're moving into our discussion on factories and workers in the Industrial Revolution. We're going to talk about a Luddite. When we get there, you'll see a question pop up, and we're not going to worry about that flashback. So the transition from cottage industries changed how people worked in factories, what life was like in factory towns, labor conditions, and eventually processes within factories. So the factories were a big change, but then within factories, there was lots of changes happening in the Industrial Revolution. So here's two questions to be paying attention while you're listening. These questions will pop up as the video moves on. So how was production organized before factories? And what were factories and factory towns like? How did the factory systems affect workers? What was mass production and what were its effects? Some of these effects were good, and I want you to really pay attention to if there were any negative effects to this progression. So production before factories, the cottage industries were where the jobs were in the homes, right? So even though working in the home had benefits for workers, such as weavers, it also had many disadvantages. A fire or flood that destroyed the home's equipment could ruin a family in an instant. Also, cloth making demanded a range of technical skills for the various steps, skills that took a long time to learn. Moreover, only adults had the physical strength that some jobs, such as weaving on a loom, required. The typical home loom was at least 6 feet wide and required strength to operate. So if the parents felt ill or died, the children could not take their places. As textile production and other occupations moved from the cottage to the factory, business owners were able to take advantage of the problems these drawbacks caused for workers. Factories was a big change from the cottage industry. People never left their homes before. Now they can leave and go to work. A factory laborer had to leave his or her home and work in a place built especially for that industry. For some workers, a job in a factory was a welcome way to support the family. For many workers, however, the factory system caused a hardship in their family. Factory work was divided into several separate, easily learned tasks, and each worker was assigned to one task. As a result, children could learn jobs as well as adults could. Many families fleeing poverty in the countryside would send their boys and girls, some as young as 6 years old, to work in the factories. In fact, some factory owners preferred hiring children because they could pay them lower wages. Still, the majority of factory workers were adult men. Factory work was dangerous for all workers, but children faced special hazards. For example, one problem with early weaving looms was that the threads often snapped. Children with their small hands could reach into the still running machines to retrieve the broken threads more easily than adults. Some children lost fingers in this process. Because there were no safety protection from the massive machines, such severe injuries were common. We're not going to look at this picture. Don't do this activity. But you can see in this picture sort of what it looks like in the factory. Do not write this in your notes. Factories changed not just the lives of workers, but also the towns where the factories were located. Also, along the rivers, large mill operations sprang up quickly. While towns grew up around the factories, some companies provided housing to their employees, many of whom arrived from the countryside with few belongings and nowhere to stay. Families crowded into shoddy, close-packed company dwellings. When water power changed to steam power, manufacturing towns rose near coal mines also. The hazards of burning coal for producing steam quickly became apparent. Thick soot from the burning coal blanketed towns, turning day into night. The smoke sent sulfur and other poisonous chemicals into the air. Factories for smelting or refining iron were often built near coal mines. They sent more dark, smoky pollution into the air. The iron smelting factories in one region of northwestern England emitted so much pollution that the region was nicknamed Black Country. Because the iron smelting required fires, one American visitor to the region called it black by day and red by night. North of this region lay the textile city of Manchester, the British city that came to symbolize the problems of industrialization. Sanitation statistics provide detail. According to one account, some neighborhoods of Manchester had only 2 toilets for every 250 residents. Under such conditions, disease spread easily, obviously. As a result, about 6 children in 10 died before the age of 5. Notice the pictures throughout this PowerPoint and as we go through this unit. Lots of artwork to represent what's happening. This picture is called the Death's Dispensary. Okay. Let's move on. Let's move on to here. So the effects of the factory system is what we're going to look at next. The factory system required large amounts of capital or money to pay for buildings, the factories, and installing the machinery. This produced 3 main levels of participants within the system. You have the wealthy business people to invest in and own the factories, the mid-level employees who run the factories and supervise the day-to-day operations, and the low-level employees to run the machines. Employers who invested their money expected to make a profit. They shared little of their profit with their employees, who were paid only by the hours they worked. At the same time, no one worker was responsible for the product's quality, and factory workers had little incentive to improve their job performance. Quality would decline. Also, workers were plentiful. British factories had no trouble finding former farm workers displaced by the enclosure movement to the United States. In the United States, immigrants were glad to find any work they could. Employers often preferred hiring women and children because men expected higher wages. Men were also seen as not taking orders as readily. In addition, many people saw unskilled factory jobs as inappropriate for men. Factory work was seen as women's work. One group of people faced a particular challenge caused by the factory system. These were the weavers and other cottage industry workers still trying to earn their living by making goods at home. Their handmade goods were more expensive than factory-made items, so they had a hard time selling them. Facing ruin, some of these workers turned to violence. One night in 1811, masked workers attacked a textile factory in Nottingham, England. The incident marked the beginning of the Luddite movement. The Luddites, named after General Ned Ludd, who probably did not exist, opposed machines that were hurtful to the commonality. In other words, that put them out of work. Luddites burned factories and smashed machines, but tried to avoid injuring people. During 1812, the movement quickly spread to other cities. Several Luddites were caught and hanged, and the Luddite movement ended quickly. The severe treatment of the Luddites illustrated that the British government did not want to get involved in factory problems. Government leaders did not see regulating business as their job. Many citizens thought that if the government helped poor people too much, they would lose their incentive to work harder. As a result, the government did not pass laws relating to work hours, safety, or child labor. Because the government took no action, in the early 1800s, British workers started to organize. They formed the first labor unions, which are organizations representing workers' interests. To urge employers to raise wages and improve conditions, unions in Britain organized strikes or work stoppages. At first, Parliament banned unions and strikes, fearing social and economic trouble. Slowly, pressure from the public and unions brought change. Hearings in Parliament in 1832 produced the Sadler Report, which described abuses in the factories. Eventually, Britain passed laws that limited work hours for adults and children. Another law required child workers to be at least 9 years old. In 1871, Parliament legalized labor unions. American workers also organized. In the United States, the first nationwide labor unions developed in the mid-1800s. While factory conditions were slowly improving, another process was also taking place: the growth of the middle class. The middle class included the various groups or types of workers that were in the middle income range, between the rich factory owners and the poor factory workers. Several groups of workers were essential to the factory system, became part of the middle class. Managers and accountants kept the factories running and their books balanced. Engineers designed the machines, and mechanics kept them in good repair. Other workers transported the goods to market, while still others were engaged in sales of those goods. As the income from increased manufacturing, buying, and selling spread throughout the economy, more people entered the middle class. Many changes in industry evolved fully in the United States. One of these changes was the development of mass production, the system of manufacturing large numbers of identical items. Elements of mass production, including interchangeable parts and the assembly line, came to be known as the American system. Interchangeable parts are identical machine-made parts. They made production and repair of factory-made goods more efficient. Before industrialization, one skilled worker might have made an entire gun, clock, or other product by himself. He would make or gather all the parts and assemble them. Process could be slow, and because the parts were all handmade, the finished products were a little different from each other. With interchangeable parts, though, one worker could put together many identical parts in a short time. Making repairs was easier, too, because replacement parts did not have to be custom made to fit. The other element of mass production related to movement within factories. In early workshops, the product stayed in one place and workers moved around it, adding parts and making refinements. An innovation was the assembly line. In an assembly line, the product moves from worker to worker, as each one performs a step in the manufacturing process. With this division of labor, workers can make items more quickly. Mass production had advantages and disadvantages. A big advantage was dramatic increase in production. Businesses that made many items quickly could charge less per item. As a result, more people could afford to buy these items. For employees, however, mass production could lead to more repetitious jobs. At first, some workers protested, refusing to work quickly, but the changes could not be stopped, and mass production became the norm in factories. We will do biographies at a later assignment.